Right, today we're going to be digging in and thinking about really good lesson planning and teaching strategies. But before we do that, I want us to go back and think about a time that we were a learner. And I want you to think about the last experience you had when you had to learn something brand new that went well and that is outside of school. So, something that you learned for the first time, that you feel like it was a positive learning experience, and that it was something from outside of school. So, for example, I might be thinking about when I had to get my driver's license here in Spain. It was not new driving to me, but all the rules in Barcelona were new. So, I'm going to be thinking now about what made that learning effective. So let's pause this video, even though we just started. So pause the video for a second and share with someone next to you about a time that you learned something brand new and talk about what made that really effective for you. And then we'll come back together. So I wish I could hear about your learning experiences. So sometimes these learning experiences just happen, but oftentimes it comes from meticulously planned lessons by an expert teacher, an expert coach who helps you along the way. So usually what these have in common is that you feel really engaged about the content and you're motivated to learn it. So hopefully that will be the case for us in our modules, and that you had a lot of time to practice. So in my driving example, what made learning how to get my license in Barcelona really effective was that I practiced with a coach next to me, and we went through time and time and time again the rules of the road. Good relationships with your teacher and coach also really help. So you have to build some trust there. So when we're thinking about making our modules, maybe in the first module, we have to set up some time for the learners to get to know our coaches and coaches to get to know our learners. And then along the way, teachers or coach give a lot of feedback and support. So teachers and coaches can kind of see where you are and they say, this might be a good next step for you. So I know I heard when we were talking with the refugees in the last class when we did the interviews, people saying, oh, now that I know this, I think this could be a good resource. So knowing exactly where your learner's at is another thing that makes it really effective. And then it was challenging or new. So something that's not boring, that you're not really unmotivated for because it is too easy. So it's right at your learning edge, is what we say. So that's going to get us grounded today in thinking about good teaching practices, because you will be making lesson plans. So it's good to know what are the best people doing when they're making lessons. So this is not something new. Since the beginning of time, people have been interested in thinking about the way we do teaching and the way we learn. Ancient philosophers, we can see here we have Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Confucius up here. They made some significant contributions to the field of education, shaping the way we think about learning, the way we think about teaching. We want to make sure that we aren't just guessing about what works when we are making lessons and these modules. We want to rely on tested research that's proven to make a difference. Today, we're not going to be going all the way back to these times to be familiar with good teaching practices, but I do just want to bring a little recognition to this has been an important topic since ancient philosophers have been learning about this. So we're not going to be studying these philosophies. However, I am going to introduce two main instructional practices. So our research cornerstones are going to be based in John Hattie's visible learning. So John Hattie is someone who did a lot of analysis, so meta analysis. So he did a lot of research and gathered a lot of data that involved hundreds of studies, millions of students, and he looked at what are the most effective teaching practices and how big of an impact do they have? So you can see here on the very bottom, television doesn't have a really big impact on learning, but something called student visible learning has the most impact. So when you hear me say things like turn and talk, so tell somebody next to you, like in the beginning of this presentation, I asked you to talk about a time that you remember learning something. That is some of this visible learning. Or if you've ever heard me like, how well are you understanding what I'm saying here? 1, a 2, or a 3, show me on your fingers. Or even when you did this reflection in the beginning of today, when Manalo asked you, what is this making you think about? Or what connections are you making? Those are all visible learning techniques. So it's naming what we're learning. So we're going to be basing some of our work, and you'll hear me reference Visible Learning by John Hattie. You might want to take note of that. And then the other one, our other cornerstone, is going to be the workshop model. So the workshop model is a way to minimize lecture and maximize learning. This involves a lot of practice. So it's more practice and doing by the students than the teacher talking directly at the students. So this was made by Lucy Calkins. You can see she's here. And the model is broken up into 3 segments that we're going to be digging into today. A mini lesson, a lot of work time with coaching. So when I was talking about practicing driving the car, practicing with the coach next to me, that's what I'm talking about there. And then the closing and sharing. Okay, so we're going to structure all the lesson planning based on the workshop model. So everything you see will have these 3 parts when we are doing our lesson planning. And then we're going to incorporate some of these visible learning techniques. So if you are taking notes, visible learning and the workshop model are 2 things I want to make sure that you are writing down. All right, so let's dig into this. The workshop model is really effective because it encourages student-centered learning. Students have lots of time to practice. It allows coaches or teachers to be freed up from the front of the class to get in there and talk to students. And then I heard a lot of people saying, we want to make sure that the content is just right for every refugee. So differentiation is the word we use for that. And so that means that students need different things. So that's going to allow the coach to sit with someone and say, oh, you really need to learn languages. So let me show you this resource. Oh, you really need to work on developing programming skills. Let's look at this resource. So that's differentiation, giving different students what they need. All right, so let's dig in a little bit of this model. We mentioned it has 3 parts, and this is how I've divided it up for our modules that are going to be 2.5 hours. The first 30 minutes will be of what we call the mini lesson, which is the direct instruction, where the teacher presents a brief and focused lesson on a specific skill or content. Then we move into the big chunk, which is the independent work time with coaching, where students work independently or in small groups on a task that was presented from the lesson that day. And then the last piece, another 30 minutes at the end, is the share or the closing. And this is where students and the teacher and coach share out, revisiting what the objective of the day is, but more importantly, that students are sharing what they've learned. So that's how this is going to break up. So we have a mini lesson, which is the lecture that you might be used to, then work time, then coming back together. It's really easy to forget to do this last closing part, but it's really important, okay? So we're gonna dig into each 3 of these parts. So if you're taking notes, you might wanna like, okay, mini lesson, work time with coaching, and then close and sharing. All right, so the mini lesson. We say this is like the gold of the lesson, all right? It's very valuable. And we want to make sure that that the learners do not miss this piece. So if anybody needs to like be out or go to the bathroom, or I was like during the mini lesson, no, the teacher's only going to talk in a workshop model for the first 30 minutes, and all the content that you need is going to come from there. So we have to make sure that the content is very valuable, okay, so that it is hard enough to push somebody's learning, and it's also relevant. It's what they need to learn. That we're very concise. So I can see here, I'm already on 9 minutes of talking, and I wanted to get this into 15. So we need to be really short with our words, and only tell the most important information. And we have to be clear with the directions of what we want the students or learners to do afterwards. So how can I structure this? It's basically a lecture. So it's their direct instruction. You need to clearly state, today I'm going to teach you, then teach the new thing, and then give clear instructions on what to do. So that's the 30-minute lesson structure. Some things we want to incorporate from visible learning might be, in the beginning of the lesson, we might say things like, so you might even write these in lesson plans, we know the best candidates for jobs create really fancy CVs. Or today I'm going to teach you how to up your skills in a field that you're interested in. Or today we're going to practice how to be the best interviewee on a Google Meet. Okay, so at the beginning of the lesson, we state really clearly what we're going to be teaching. And then at the end of the mini lesson piece, right, just the direct instruction, we always give a chance, okay, turn and talk to somebody next to you about what is this making you think? Or you might say, is anyone making a connection to their real life about what we're talking about? Can you share? So that's like making some connections. Or you might say, think about what was introduced. What doubts or questions do you have about this topic? So this is the visible learning. So what you just talked about in the lesson, then give them a chance to kind of a little bit reflect before they go into the work time. Okay. Another good way to do this is ask students, hey, write down what you just learned in your own words. Quick sentence or two. All right. So we're still in the mini lesson. We're still in that 30-minute block in the beginning, but these are just some good sentence stems that you can use at the beginning of the direct instruction and towards the end of it. So we have the modules made for you. So you just actually have to read this and think, what am I trying to teach someone? Okay. And how am I going to do that? So my mini lesson might start for this one. I can read the module objective here, help refugee women identify and leverage their strengths and interests. And I can read the key takeaways to cultivate self-respect, self-love, and self-awareness. And I'm thinking that I might say something like, could candidates for a job leverage, okay, or use their strengths and interests to find the right fit in the job market? Today, I'm going to teach you how to use some technology tools to do this, okay? So that's how I might start a mini lesson for module 1, okay? We're gonna be digging into these, all right? So I'm just showing you how you might start that, okay? So that is the first portion, which is the mini lesson, okay? So we're done talking about the mini lesson. So we've made some direct instruction for the coaches to give, and now the majority of their time together with the learners is going to be in the work time and coaching. So this is the independent or partner work where students are on a task and they are creating something that was just taught from the mini lesson, okay? When we are doing work time with coaching, students should be then, so the next part of the lesson is to now apply what they've been learning. So for example, if my point was to leverage your strengths and interests, I maybe taught you about Fishbowl, an online website where you can find jobs online. And now you might be searching within there to match something in your interest, okay? So you're gonna apply directly what you learned in the mini lesson into this time. During that time, the teacher or coach is not in the front of the room. They are sitting within the group and either sitting with partners that have similar level or interest or needs, or they're sitting individually and talking and working with them. They ask questions to push learning, and they also give differentiated instruction. So they give different tools to the students or learners who need it. All right, this brings me back to thinking about visible learning. So what are some good questions or sentence stems that we might include in our lesson plan to prompt our coaches during this work time? It might sound like, so before this work time starts, so if I've introduced a lesson, I might say, here's what we need to do. Before you go, who can summarize what our job is during this time? This is to make sure your directions are clear. Or think about what you are going to do during this time and make a list of the 3 things you want to do. Just making sure that your students are understanding it. And then during the work time coaching, the coaches will walk around and maybe say, hey, what are you working on? And they want to listen to their learners' needs and then suggest additional resources. That's the differentiation piece, okay? Or they might say, how are you adjusting this task to your personal situation? Or they might ask, sorry about this typo, students to evaluate their own learning. So where do you think you fall on the scale of 1 to 5? How well do you understand this content? Or, which might be, we're going to talk about this next, they might take breaks and have a group share out what they've done. So let's say a student or a learner did something really well. They might say, hey, everybody stop. I want everybody to look at this. This is a really good example of what I'm talking about, okay? So when we do those pauses, that is called the mid-workshop lesson. So in a 1.5 hour chunk of time, there is time. If a coach notices that there's some misunderstanding with a lot of the learners, they might bring the whole group or maybe just a chunk, a small group together and say, hey, I see that this group needs a little bit of help on selecting a photo, a good photo for a resume. So they might bring that group together and just show that. Or maybe they see that the whole group is in the same spot where we need to use a Padlet to organize our resources, and it's not really looking good on people's screens. They might pause and then reteach something. Okay, so when people are understanding, we just do a pause in this workshop time and then bring everybody together to reteach it. Then if there was too much content, sorry, there's not a dash here. If there's too much content in a mini lesson, they might do the mini lesson and then they take a pause, like a break in between here, and say, okay, I have one more thing to teach you. All right, so maybe you taught Canva here, and then you're like, okay, work on Canva, but halfway through, I'm gonna stop, and now I'm going to teach you how to save the Canva as a PDF. All right, so if the directions are gonna be too long or there's too much content, sometimes we break up this workshop time into 2 chunks, and you can teach another little mini lesson here in the middle. All right. And then that brings us to the third piece. So we talked about the mini lesson, which is the direct instruction, the lecture. We talked about the independent work time, which is the chunk of the work, and it's practice, and doing. I can think in our modules that the people will be actually doing and practicing. So if I taught how to be a good interviewee on a video call, they would be practicing actually doing that again and again and again. And so then the last piece is the closing or share, okay, where students share their work with the class or in small groups. So this might look before we say what this looks like, I just want to really say how important this is. So research shows that to make learning stick and make people remember what they've learned, we have to close the circle. Okay, so when we learn something new, we kind of like open this piece of our brain and then we practice it, and then we go off and we do something else. If we go off and do something else before we close the entire loop and come back to the end and say we've learned this, it's less likely that what we've just taught will stick. So we want to make sure that we do a closing, and that can be done by sharing out, doing a short reflection, tell a partner something you've learned. It's also a good time for the coach or teacher to restate the main teaching point of the day. So you can say like, today I taught you this. What do you think about that? Or what connections are you making? Or what is that making you think? All right. So now I'm going to go back to in the closing and sharing, what can we use from visible learning? And so some good ways to reflect and close up are things like this. All right, everybody, we're going to sit in a circle and we're going to say, I used to think, but now I think. So maybe it would sound like, I used to think that a CV design wasn't very important, but now I know that it can help me get to the top of the stack of selection. Or you could ask students to write down 3 ideas or facts that they know, or 2 questions that they have. They could ask, during today's work, what challenges did you face? Where did you get stuck? And what did you do to push through that? Or what is one part of the learning that you want to spend some more time on? And how can this help you in the future? Anything that has the learner stop and think about what they learned and then verbalize it either to the teacher or to somebody else. That helps close that learning loop up and makes the learning stick. Okay? So I'm going to actually do that to us now. So I taught you the 3 parts of a workshop model: the mini lesson, the work time with coaching, and the closing and sharing. So when we're writing lesson plans, I hope I see mini lesson, direct lecture, what's it on, what's the work time, what are the students going to be doing, and what's the closing and sharing. I hope I see that. And we also talked a lot about visible learning. And we know that that makes a big impact on our learners. So throughout the mini lesson, we might put some sentence stems in there of how you can state the objective. Today I'm going to teach you. Or I can see, then ask your people to turn and talk. All right, so some of those tips that I gave you on visible learning, I hope that we see those in the lesson plans that we're doing. So to close up your learning on making really effective lesson plans, I want you to turn and talk to someone next to you. And I want you to discuss, what are the essential things that you want to keep in mind when you make lesson plans for these modules? Okay. So, what's one important thing that you're taking from this and I think I'm going to make sure that I do that? So, go ahead and you can stop the video and turn and talk to somebody next to you. And then I think it would be great if you shared it out with the entire group.